Hey, welcome back to our live coverage of the Mackinac Policy Conference that's put on by the Detroit Regional Chamber each year. I'm Christy McDonald. We're so happy that you're joining us on myvote.org, Detroit Public TV's initiative to keep voters engaged and informed. This is the second year that we are covering the Mackinac Policy Conference, kind of pulling back the curtain so people can see what really goes on up here and get in on the conversation about the issues. I have two gentlemen joining me right now who are always in the know about the conversation, about the issues.
No, but we know people who are.
That's right. Devin Scillian from WDIV and Stephen Clark from WXYZ.
Hi, good to see you.
Two guys who I love to call friends as well, so it's nice to have you here at the big table
Good
with
to be
me.
back. Hard to believe it's been a year since we last sat here.
It's been a year?
I know.
Wow.
Yes.
But I'm hungry for fudge again, which means that it's worn off. It usually takes a year to get rid of that sugar high I have from eating all that fudge from the year before. So, all right, so we're sitting here in the big room, and everyone's very boisterous and very happy. But I want to ask you about what you think the big headlines are going to be from the conference this year, and sort of the vibe and the feel that you're feeling going in this year.
Well, I think it's interesting that we don't have a lot of lawmakers here, between Congress being in session and the legislature working on the budget. So I guess I'm curious as to see what that does to everything. You can look at it two ways. We've been joking today. I told the governor, I said, well, it may be that it's missing that influence piece, or it may be that we've cleared out all the riffraff and we can actually
You're talking about the lobbyists who aren't going to show up because the legislators aren't here.
Well, that's right too. So I think that's an interesting component to this. I think there's a lot of political intrigue that's starting to develop. This thing with Thad McCotter is just
amazing.
Off the chart for me. I've never heard anything quite like it. And so that's been a real topic of conversation.
Yeah, what about you,
Well, I heard a rumor on that one that actually Conyers also submitted like 1,200 signatures, of which 400 or 500 were disqualified. He did it early enough that the Secretary of State warned him,
and you could get them
and
redone.
he got them redone and refiled. So, but apparently, what I'm curious about is why suddenly this is happening to experience. I mean, this isn't McCotter's first trip to this rodeo.
Right.
So why don't, and Conyers, I mean, come on, nobody's been there more. How in the world could you get caught in that kind of thing?
I don't know. Is it bad staff? Is it just carelessness? Or but it has the potential to really shake up the landscape here with Thad McCotter.
There's a story to be told here of exactly how this happened, because it's just astonishing. I've never seen anything like it.
Dingle today, and she said, she said for some reason she had a bad feeling, and a couple of weeks ago went to her staff, her husband's staff, and said, check those signatures, and she said she's had a feeling about it. Yeah. So where she got that feeling, I mean, she's kind of tuned into things, so maybe she saw something coming. So.
Yeah, well, and it's going to cost Thad McCotter a heck of a lot more money if he's going to do some kind of writing campaign.
Right.
So
well, and that was another interesting thing. He doesn't have a whole lot of money on hand because he was supposed to be a layout.
He was supposed to be shoo-in.
So, it's really interesting.
Another big headline, obviously, last year at the conference talked a lot about the East meets West, and talking about Grand Rapids and including a lot from around the state. This year, while there is still a lot of inclusive talk, there's so much focus on Detroit. And the fact that you have the challenge to the consent agreement or the financial stability agreement now. What do you make of Mayor Bing being here and his leadership, and what maybe he has to do to impress upon the business leaders in Detroit that he is still the man to lead this city?
He's had a rough couple of weeks, not only health-wise, but this sort of debacle over whether or not he really supported this legal effort to go and rescind the consent agreement or find it illegal. So he's had a rough couple of weeks. But I also think that we're starting to see the pieces fall together for that next campaign, because that'll be next year's big thing. And people keep asking me, who I think is the mayor going to, is Dave Bing going to run again? And I think that what the answer that I keep, I can't tell anybody until I know what the job of mayor is going to be. What the heck is the job of mayor? Are you a custodian? Yeah, it's a really difficult question, but I think that there's a session tomorrow called Detroit, A Tale of Two Cities, and I think that really sums up precisely what's going on here. There is so much good going on right now. You've got 10,000 more people working downtown than there were 2 years ago in Detroit. You've got 95 to 98% occupancy in apartments and condos in Midtown and downtown. There's an energy downtown right now that is just, we haven't seen the likes of it in a long time. Yeah. All that's happening against this profound crisis.
Leadership that is also shaky here. What do you think, Stephen?
Well, I talked to the mayor a couple of minutes ago. First I said, so how are you feeling? Then I determined after I'd asked him, that's probably what everybody's asking him. So I came up with a strategy for him. I suggested that he said, when they ask him, how are you feeling, he could say, I feel a lot better if you give me some money. And I think he may use that. But that's what he's here for. I mean, he says, seriously, he's here to make sure he gets some sort of commitments from these other regional leaders to understand that, as we go, so do you go. And I think for the first time in the 10 years I've covered this, I actually see an economy lined up to where they can actually get some of the stuff done they've been talking about all these years.
To a degree. I mean, as long as this argument is still out there where you've got people in Detroit government arguing that the state owes the city a lot of money, it becomes a bit of a non-starter, and it kind of shuts down the path to moving, because it's just not going anywhere. And I think it feels to the governor and to Andy Dillon and a lot of people in Lansing obstructionist and not really a way of moving forward.
I think an interesting point you bring up too is that we don't know what this is going to be like. I mean, we're going into uncharted territory in terms of what the leadership is going to be, how this whole consent agreement is going to work, who's really going to be pulling the strings, and
this is all pioneer work.
This is, and I would argue that this is one of the more pivotal times in the city's history. I mean, we're rounding the corner that. I don't know what's going to be there.
I'm losing count of pivotal times in our history.
This is big.
But
next year, this is big.
But as Devin points out, I mean, also it's pivotal. But this is as good as I've seen Detroit in the 10 years I've lived here. I mean, the midtown and the downtown areas are certainly taking root, and they have the ability to grow out. It's just, will Detroit get out of the way, or will they impede it?
All right, and that's a perfect way to bring Craig Fahle from WTET into the conversation. How are you, Craig? So sneaking into our conversation, and talking a little bit about leadership in Detroit and what it's going to look like, and under the consent agreement, do you feel hopeful or optimistic that we have the right leadership in place to move forward in the city?
Given the events of the last couple of weeks, I can't say that I'm optimistic that things are going to work out the way that they would like. I mean, this was never going to be a smooth transition to this new form of governance that we're going to be living under for the next few years. We knew it was going to be bumpy. But the types of bumps we're seeing right now are kind of unnecessary. You got to find somebody to put on the board. You've been given a job to put some people on the board. City Council needs to get that done, because we can't get started until this is done.
We're just taping something on the back of your shoulder
That's
just
okay.
to make sure you're all right.
I'm poked and prodded all the time around here.
This is the magic of television, right?
But Craig's right. There is a certain point you can't expect a path of no resistance. You can't expect this all to be smooth. Like in 1776 when John Adams said, it's a revolution, we're going to have to offend somebody. It's kind of how they work. Yeah.
Let me ask you guys, as members of the media, and obviously people who love where they live. We all love where we live in Southeast Michigan, and we all have an investment in where we live and where we're raising our families. How do you separate that line in terms of when you come up here and you cover something like this, and trying to steer clear of the line of being the Detroit booster and making sure that you've got to tell the story that needs to be told, and if there is negativity to it, and the fact that if there's screwing up going on, that you got to maintain, you got to toe that line?
Craig, I'm interested in your thoughts on this, because Stephen and I get emails after a newscaster every day are talking
you get
to
the
people,
callers,
and you have to balance what you're hearing with what you feel.
Well, you do, but it's really not that hard. I mean, if you tell the truth is there are a lot of things that are really, really messed up here, and the truth is there are a lot of really cool things happening here at the same time. The problem is that people get focused and only want to see one side of that. So if they've decided that Detroit is a lost cause, and you talk about something positive, they'll say, what's the point? It's not going to do anything. For those people who are so invested in everything being positive all the time, if I bring up the fact that we've got a crime problem in the city of Detroit, why are you talking about that? The fact is, people just need to wake up to the fact that there's good and bad, and you take the good with the bad. You try to fix the bad stuff, build on the good stuff. Getting people to that point, though, is incredibly, incredibly difficult.
And, you bring up the question of crime, and you guys cover it every night. You probably have about 5 VOs, a live shot with something to do with some kind of crime. You don't do that anymore? But some kind of crime. Do you think that is the next real big step here? We've talked about businesses coming down, that crime has to be addressed.
First of all, I'm a big believer in perception is reality. People will believe what they're told, and we have a big voice in doing that. If we every night lead with crime, eventually people will believe crime is all that's happening. I've had the advantage, I consider it an advantage of having lived in a bunch of other cities through my life, including some pretty decent big cities like New York, San Diego, Denver. You know, let me tell you something. There's nothing different about crime in Detroit that you're not going to find in Washington, D.C., in New York City, in Denver, Colorado. It's just, the problem is here we tend to focus on it because people just assume that's what's going on. So we continue to feed them the same story that they believe, and I think it becomes overwhelming. But really, I mean, last weekend Chicago had a big string of crimes. It was really weird to sit there and say, oh, this rash of crimes in Chicago was far worse than anything we could imagine in Detroit for one weekend. But yet in Chicago, they'll move past it. We won't.
But the thing is, people won't care about what's happening in Chicago because they assume it's limited. Oh, that's the South Side. It's not going to happen to me when I'm on Michigan Avenue going to, these fancy stores. In Detroit, they see the crime stories, they see the abandoned buildings, so they just assume that everywhere you go in the city is going to be dangerous, that you're potentially a victim at any moment. I mean, I've been working in Midtown Detroit long before it was Midtown. And knock on wood, I've never once had a problem with anybody in that neighborhood. But it doesn't mean that stuff isn't happening. I mean, so some of the stuff you guys report on, you have to. I mean, it's just, wow, this is really happening in our community.
When we get into trouble is when we report crime without context.
Yeah.
Fact of the matter is, so much crime, involves the drug trade. Mm-hmm. It involves people who know each other. It's not nearly as random as it's often portrayed. Yes. That's a problem. But my shorthand answer for most of my family and friends who live elsewhere who want to say, what's it like in Detroit? It's complicated. It's complicated.
That's the best answer I've heard about this.
I should say it is complicated. All right, so this is not a complicated question. Last question for you guys. The two people you want to interview. Two people you want to talk to at this event.
Here, or is this that?
Oh no, this is not dead or alive. Yeah, no. If you could have a dinner with Abraham Lincoln, Jesus, and Devin Scillian.
If you were a tree, people here.
No, people here. Like in the next 2 days, you guys are covering this. Who would you like to have an interesting conversation with?
Here we can't talk to.
Yeah. Actually, there are some people who are not quite as available as we want.
All right.
So
I'm going to change it then. The two interesting conversations you think you'd like to have.
I think that Tom Fried. I'm moderating Tom Friedman's conversation on Thursday, and I find him an interesting guy. I know he can be a little polarizing for a lot of people, but he coined the term "the world is flat," at least in the way we know that term. And I think for Detroit, the lessons of globalization are profound, and so I think Tom would be one of them. I'm always curious these days to talk to Bob Ficano because his life is complicated.
It's complicated, Stephen.
Well, it was Bob Ficano. I mean, because he has studiously avoided us for the last couple of months. And the question I'd like to ask Bob Ficano is, I said, okay, so I understand what you're saying is that it wasn't your fault that things were happening and you're taking care of it. But there are two options here. One is either bad stuff was happening and you knew about it, or bad stuff was happening and you didn't know about it. Which is worse? Which is worse? And that's the question I want to ask, but I don't think I'm going to get that close to Bob Ficano.
And so that's why I'm going to vote against Bob Ficano on this person I want to talk to, because I know I'm probably not going to get much that's really going to matter at this point in time. Because anything he says about economic development, people who are listening are just going to be like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
What's going on with the scandal?
A really interesting piece recently about when he tried to write a column about the good things that were happening with the Aerotropolis. He got ripped by all these callers and emailers who have no appetite for good news because it might, because it can't possibly be good if it's coming out of Wayne County. That's a problem too. But who do you want to hear from?
Well, actually, one of the panels that I do every year up here.
I'm
sorry.
But this is going to be a problem at this table for sure. No, but one of the things I do every year up here, I have the three presidents of the University Research Corridor universities, Michigan, Michigan State, and Wayne State on. Because that is positive stuff. This is real innovation that is going on here, and things that could be potentially commercialized at some point in time, that could lead to startups, could lead to real jobs, and it's research dollars. Plus there's a lot to talk. Hey, look, tuitions are a product of what's going on in Lansing. So when you look at what's happening with funding, there's a big discussion to be had about how much we really value education in this state,
no doubt
and so
about it.
that's one of the big things I'm going to be hitting.
All right,
So that and the Dalai
gentlemen-
Lama. Yeah.
Okay, that and the Dalai. And so, what, gentlemen, what does this
And the
mean?
Dalai Lama, yes.
Wrap it up.
That
So,
was around for everybody.
Craig,
Okay.
Craig Fahle, WDET, Stephen Clark, WXYZ, Devin Scillian, WDIV. Gentlemen, thank you so much
Thank you.
for joining me. I so appreciate it. All right, so let's head on out.